Hare Krishna. Welcome everybody to the Vedic Inquirer. Thank you so much, Madan Gopal Prabhu, for agreeing to be interviewed. We'd love to get more ISKCON leaders interviewing. And just by way of introduction, you're a zonal supervisor, you're an initiating guru, you're US National Communications Officer, and I believe you're also part of the faculty at GBC College. Thank you so much for agreeing to interview on this topic.
And thank you, Damodar Prabhu. I'm happy to be here. I think it's an important topic that we should all be discussing.
Agreed. It's one of the things that sort of serves as a bit of a blemish to the society. Obviously, as a parent, you'd be naturally concerned, but you were sharing with me just as part of our preamble how important child protection is to you. I wonder if you could start by saying a few words along those lines.
Sure. When most of us join ISKCON, what we sign up for is a spiritual experience, an experience of connection, understanding what God is, understanding how God is to be connected with, how we can connect with others who are interested in connecting with God, with Krishna, uplifting our souls, being better people, and developing a society that is exemplary in many ways. And so we come in with certain assumptions that people who are already interested in doing such elevated things, who are generally want to do things that are way better than the average moral person. We come with certain assumptions that pretty much everybody in that circle will already be protective of each other, loving of each other, free from the tendency to abuse, and so we make those assumptions, and it may even lead to some naivety in that area. Now, Srila Prabhupada has famously taught us that our devotee children are Vaikuntha children. We have that quote, and not just our children, any child, whether they come to ISKCON or not, but especially if they come in contact with devotees of the Lord, they're especially fortunate. They are the future of this planet and certainly of this movement. So to ensure that our children are completely safe, I feel that it is of vital importance that everyone in our community is mindful, educated, and aware of the different situations and factors that can cause harm. Now, this awareness becomes naturally heightened when we become parents. My son was born back in 2002. He's turning 22 this year, but of course, when he was born, my mind would fill up with all the different ways I would childproof our home, lock the kitchen cabinets, put the soft bumpers on the corners of the table. We went all out. It's the most natural instinct that is found everywhere, even in other species of life, right? So you can imagine when we learned about various abuses and assaults that so many of our Vaikuntha children in ISKCON had experienced over decades. It was quite shocking for us, and it was sobering. My wife, Mansi Ganga, was moved to and compelled to serve in some way in this area. So she's the head of the child protection team at our temple here. So just to summarize how we as a movement, as an organization, as leaders, how we treat women, children, the elderly, that is a reflection of our care and maturity of spiritual communities and organizations.
I don't know if we have a higher concentration of those who abuse children. I suspect we're probably on a par with external society, which in itself is worrying. But very concerning is our lack of responsiveness. So it could be argued that in the 70s, people were just less aware, less vigilant. Maybe the specter of abuse was less known to people. But what we're finding is even so many years later, we seem squeamish about tackling abusers and often advocating on their behalf, arguing that there should be minimal penalties. Why do you think our society and its leaders in particular seem to have not really grasped the nettle? They haven't really understood what's required of them in this regard.
Yeah, that's a very good question. Of course, there's many nuances, very many facets to it. And of course, our society, unfortunately, fortunately or unfortunately, it's global. It has a lot of diversity, and so like why are they problematic responses in trying to protect in protecting the children, right? So let me just approach it from one angle. So part of the strength of our organization is that we have a council of leaders. We don't have a single person. The council of leaders called the GBC leading ISKCON. Now this strength also comes with concomitant weaknesses. Right? The pros and cons to every configuration. There's advantages if there's one head and it controls everything. And like when Prabhupada was there, he's one person. That has advantages. But then there's also cons to that. If ISKCON was only headed by one person, that person did something wrong, it could be problematic. So strengths of this configuration of GBC, they include diversity of cultural, geographical, ethnic, and other backgrounds that add to the richness of perspectives that make up our leadership. And then we find that the level of flexibility in terms of values, this is the spectrum of what are values, and what offenses are considered allowable, forgivable, trivializable, if that's a word, can also vary drastically depending on the cultural background of the leaders. See, when you have conflict resolution, if there are conflicts around facts, those can be resolved relatively easily by just exploring and laying out all the facts and evaluating them. And then you can resolve that conflict. But when we have conflict around values, it is very difficult to resolve and sometimes can lead to serious escalations and threats. Now, the reason why I'm going to such depth to highlight the fact that even though things may seem rather straightforward to one person, can be rather incredulous to somebody else. Like, it should be a no-brainer. Zero tolerance for child protection. What does that even mean? To one person, this is child abuse. And the other person is, oh, just a pat on the back. This is part of culture. It's not. Why are you making such a big deal of it? And this is where we run into many of the difficulties in creating and enforcing policies around child protection. Now, you would think this should be a no-brainer, but given that these and many other factors, it's not always a slam dunk. Now, as to the question as to why this problematic response is trying to protect one's friends, how complicated human psychology can get in this regard. The very close devotee friend or the leader or the swami or the guru, etc., who we've been worshiping as good as God all these years, and now it comes out that he's been abusing children. My first instinct will be to deny it, get into a cognitive dissonance, because the mind finds it hard to grasp the reality of the situation. And then as part of this denial, one can easily build conspiracy theories around how this has to have been a politically motivated frame job and so on. And then that gathers some steam and followers. And before you know it, we have factions, rallying around one side of the theory and another. If we can put in place some mature protocols of due process, it could help in mitigating some of these concerns. Because what is the two extremes, either not enough due process or too much due process. Given the human nature, the psychology of human nature, there will never be a legal system that will be absolutely preventing such emotionally charged situations from arising. It's just a few thoughts in my mind around that.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. I'm a bit worried about the idea of moral relativism. So yeah. You talked about a pat on the back, but if a child is beaten severely in a school environment, or if someone carries out an act of sexual depravity with a child, is there any culture in the world where that's considered not a big deal, really?
No. In extreme, very clear cases, there is no cultural, at some point, some cases or many cases go beyond the cultural aspect of it. The cultural diversity is just one part of it. Now, some other part, like I mentioned, is this: if somebody did very egregious things, something extremely sexual, violent assault repeatedly, either on one child or multiple children, the same person. This is absolutely unacceptable, of course, in any culture, unforgivable, right? But like I mentioned, it can cause such a sense of dissonance that there'll be ostrich rout, complete denial, utterly minimize the very existence of what happened, burying the head in the sand and keep telling ourselves this cannot possibly happen by that person, or even more, this cannot possibly happen in our glorious movement. It's just not possible. And then,
And what you just,
yeah,
sorry,
sure,
just
go ahead.
finish. No,
No,
what
yeah,
you're describing there is, oh, sorry, there's a delay.
please,
So
please,
please
continue. I was just saying the same
finish
thing. Yeah.
your thought.
Yeah. So, you know, when we deny it, I think there's, in my understanding of it, only a few people do this, but they're vocal enough to create different. I think the majority of the devotees in ISKCON, the vast majority of devotees in ISKCON, we were like, this is absolutely unacceptable. We are all for 100% zero tolerance. And especially now you can decide how much punishment to give for what kind of offense, but our children need to be protected. Our leaders need to be aligned with that.
What you're describing falls into that sort of category of human frailty, right? The fact that we're prone to things like cognitive dissonance and misplaced sympathy and so on. I agree with you. I think the vast majority of devotees are deeply concerned. I think there are growing concerns, but the worry is, I think, that we're not seeing some of the messaging we might expect to see from leaders. And this is where, because many of them are gurus, even their own disciples saying, hang on, I don't know if I'm comfortable with my Guru Maharaj not taking the right stand on this. I don't know if this is starting to bring into question judgment and four defects and those kind of ideas. I don't know if you have thoughts on those things, because clearly we set a very high standard in terms of what a spiritual authority is meant to be. But if we seem confused about morality, it can undermine faith.
No, very good point. I agree with you on this. I think all the leaders should come out in vocal support of child protection, either, you know, whatever it may be, increase the standards, increase the funding, increase the awareness, increase the education to the leaders. Now that is happening. The education leaders is happening, okay? You know, the GBC college is there. I'm one of the teachers. I took GBC college back in 2019. And one of the more rigorous of the courses was actually child protection. It's quite rigorous. And I was very happy to see that. And you can't pass GBC college unless you know a lot about, at least, you know, what child protection standards are, what the different issues can be, and how it gets pretty technical. But the fact that they put you through the rigor, it kind of impresses upon at least the next generation of leaders that this is an important thing. It's not a module to just kind of touch and go. It is actually pretty involved. So that's one thing that made me happy. But what is still missing is the visible like promotion. Like the guru should come out, and it should be every now and then they should even give a class on it, or class. It doesn't have to be on cases or anything, but the class on, you know, we as a movement will not tolerate our children being abused, you know. And then you can give some quotes from the scriptures and just kind of show that you're on the same page with this initiative. You don't necessarily have to make a big deal of it, or technically, you know, how it's going to be organized in the movement and CPO, but you can at least make the point that I stand with the children, I stand with protection, and there's not nearly enough of that happening. So perhaps that could be an initiative that the leaders should start talking about, that, okay, perception is reality. Why are we holding back from what's called doing the right thing? You know, we should be doing the right thing, and we should be known to be doing the right thing, and we should make it vocal that we are trying our best to do the right thing. Not that when it comes to child protection, I'm going to zip her up. This is not my thing. No, we have to. That's what I personally believe. As a leader myself, I don't shy away from it. I mean, right here, I'm not coming out. This whole world is for everyone to see. I stand for it. I support my wife, who stands for it. She's doing a seva in this area. I support all the devotees are working very hard. Child Protection Office, I've spoken with our local directors many times. And another thing that I'm trying to push for, with the help of other North American leaders, is more funding for Child Protection Office, like substantially more, you know. And we're actually doing it now. Like, we have raised a lot more, you know, like we have this GBC dues that every temple has to give. right? So this year, starting 2024, 2025, is a substantial jump in what we're going to be getting from all the different temples, the dues, and the lion's share of all that money, the lion's share, huge percentage, is earmarked specifically for child protection. We are putting our money where the mouth is, so it's not me alone. I mean, there's quite a few leaders who really believe in it, and I'm very happy to see, at least in North America, that's happening. So it's a gradual progress, but like you said, it's not nearly enough. And our gurus, in particular, need to be doing more. That's my opinion. Maybe you can reach out to them somehow. There's something we can discuss with our other leaders.
Well, you have a particular expertise in communications and messaging and correct choice of messaging. And I think we were talking earlier that not only are we not seeing enough speaking of the importance of protecting children, but actually the only time GBCs do seem to be heard on the topic is either when they're criticizing CPO or they're standing up for a friend who's been accused. So that sends precisely the wrong message. So I'm really encouraged that you've decided to tell us your thoughts on the topic, and hopefully seeing that you've not just been eaten alive, people will also think, okay, maybe we can do that as well. The only other message I've really seen is just distancing. Oh, well, I never really knew the guy. Okay. The pictures say otherwise. So let's just talk for a minute. So yeah, we've talked about egregious abuse like sexual abuse and being hit in a gurukul and those kind of things. Even the attitudes towards devotees growing up, we might have even mythologized a little bit in the early days. Oh, Vaikuntha children, and we might have expected them to be lighting fires by mantras within a few years. I wonder if there's almost a collective, oh, well, these kids didn't turn out to be all that, and real judgment. Hey, kid, how come you're not enthusiastically dancing? Hey, kid, why are you not chanting your japa? So we've possibly denied them really solid educations and a good start in the world in many cases. But we may have even created almost a hostile attitude where we've expected them to live up to some idealistic standard and then almost withdrawn affection and support if they're not. I wonder if you could just say a few words along what are the right settings attitudinally to welcome children into the movement, to encourage them to develop a natural affection for Krishna and a lifelong commitment and all those things.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, this is one of my favorite topics to talk about. And I'll tell you, last Sunday was Father's Day here in America. I don't know if it's global, but it's at least in America, it's Father's Day. And I was invited to speak at the Brooklyn Temple there on that topic. And I did bring up this notion that as ISKCON parents, we do read, say, reading Gita, and Krishna says in the 13th chapter that these are items of knowledge. One of the items of knowledge is detachment from wife, children, etc. Right? That's like, right? So now that is misunderstood and misapplied. And if somebody is not particularly good at being a parent or be frustrated with too many things to do, and you reach that, oh, this is a way out. I can start being indifferent to my children, or this probably means I should not be attached emotionally, or this probably means I should not even have affection. And affection is the most important vitamin for our children, and we're malnourishing them with that. Now, interestingly, if the devotee only read the verse and didn't read the purport, they'll miss it. In the purport, Prabhupada writes beautifully, and he says, as for detachment from wife, children, etc., it is not that one should not have affection for these. These are natural objects of affection. He talks about this. We miss that. If we don't read carefully, we don't see the beautiful affection Prabhupada had for all his devotees. And if that doesn't translate into a saturation of sweet affection for our children who are, they're devotees. But because of that immaturity, which is still, by the way, it perpetuates generation after generation. It will not automatically happen. We have to talk about this. We have to bring it up in classes. Fill your child's life with affection. Raise your child with a lot of love. Prabhupada said, don't do other things. You focus on your child. That's your deity worship. these are important instructions Prabhupada gave us, but we, if we misapply and bring immaturity into it, and we become abusive as somewhat like subtle level as parents also. And children in general don't listen to what you say, but they watch very carefully what you do, and so the Vedic model of parenting is very nice. From age 0 to 5, you just love them so much, you'd spoil them practically. Then from 5 to 14, a lot of stricture. The stricture works. No beating or anything, but you're strict with principles. It works because the first 5 years, the child knows it's coming from a place of love. And then after 15, you become friends again. They don't discipline after that. So if you use the Vedic model, the Bhagavad model, the children do come out quite nice and they're happy, but we miss that very core message. So that's one aspect I think that is part of child protection. I would say we're protecting our own children, So in my opinion, I think we have the Grihastha Vision team that's trying to promote these kind of values. We all class givers, in particular, I would say, especially sannyasis, should be more in tune with this because they themselves don't have the experience a lot of the times of raising children. And so it's important for them to really promote the affection aspect of Prabhupada and not promote the cold version of misapplied detachment. We have to really get a nuanced understanding of what Prabhupada wanted as a family unit in ISKCON.
It's a good point. I mean, we learn, for instance, that the Kanishta likes the virtue signal and poses the greatest devotee and doesn't actually have good relating skills. This is one of the things they don't seem to know how to do. And I wonder if in our movement we've done that to some extent. We take high Vedantic ideas and don't have a lot of warmth behind them. I mean, you cited there the sannyasi population. In a fully mature society, most of our sannyasis would have been through household life.
That's right.
And therefore have more insight and understanding. It does feel that there are sometimes very hostile messages towards family connections. And while Srimad Bhagavatam might have people's minds on the ultimate goal of life, to be scathing, to be unfriendly, to be hostile, for women and children to be fighting even to get acknowledgement, that seems to be a very unfortunate situation. Let's look at it. So, I mean, well, obviously, we're very aware of the damage that abuse can cause lifelong to an individual. How much damage is this doing to the society's reputation? You as a communications person, I imagine anytime some story hits the press, and we've definitely got more of them than we would ever feel comfortable with or whatever, it must be a nightmare. It must be like, how do you manage that in a way that's responsible? There's the glossy form of, look, it didn't really happen and everything's really good. Don't look somewhere else. And then the sort of acknowledging these are challenges and we're working through them. Just what's your experience as a communications person in terms of dealing with stories of abuse hitting the headlines?
Yeah, no, that's a very good question. And ISKCON communications is both the voice as well as the conscience of the movement, because what we say about the movement is a reflection on how we relate to it internally. And also what we say, our own devotees read and listen. And so it has to reflect the conscience. So whenever there's a breach of child protection, whether it makes it out to the public domain or not, it is of great importance for us as communications to understand how it happened, what we can do to prevent it going forward, and so on. What are the various facets about it? It's also important for us to appropriately and clearly communicate the relevant learnings internally. Sunlight, the best disinfectant, transparency. And of course, for larger cases, it becomes a big media expose. Our communications department has been commended over the years, by the way, for its radical honesty and transparency. Like New York Times were shocked. They said, ISKCON, you've been unusually candid compared to, say, other organizations that had unusually candid. Like we came out and said we admitted it. We admitted our failings, We are commended for its transparency. We acknowledged our failings, outlined our lines of corrective action, and continued monitoring of it, or at least try to get that message out that we need to be doing it to the leaders. So when children are not protected, something awful takes place. Certainly the name of Srila Prabhupada and the beloved ISKCON will be severely tarnished. Parents will stop coming to our centers and will try to discourage others from coming. It ends up even diminishing in the name of Lord Krishna, supreme protector, whom we're supposed to glorify. But we can end up bringing shame to Krishna Bhakti itself. So this is something that ISKCON communications really, I would say we really talk about it a lot. We have weekly meetings, all the global communication directors every week. And child protection comes up as a topic all the time. It's sometimes seems it's only a matter of time when another story will pop up, but we are really trying to do both, be candid, but as well as reflect internally that, come on, guys, get it together, and because of the diversity of a leadership, and there is, I have to admit, in everyone's heart, some degree of trying to protect your friends, which is, just because it's understandable doesn't mean it's right. It's wrong. It's a kind of a corruption.
Sorry.
Yeah. So yeah, I would say it's a kind of a subtle corruption that's part of being human, but we need to make sure we keep that cleaned out as much as possible.
You've spoken there about how, the response of the communications team is maybe, different than many other religious movements might have adopted, trying to steer into the skid, so to speak. But how damaging is it when there's an article that says this took place in ISKCON? Does the general public go, oh yeah, well, I guess these things happen everywhere? Or do they go, oh, these people are just like the Catholic Church, or I knew they were a cult? And I think it's one thing for there to be an issue, and then it's another thing for there to be perceived inaction by leadership or strange messaging by leadership. No, we'll keep this guy as a guru, or, all of those kind of things. How damaging is it? What does it do to our reputation? Is our reputation, really dented, or is it just, oh yeah, whatever, people take it in their stride?
No, it is actually very heavily hurt. Now, how do I know? Like, how would I know it's heavily hurt? Because I also engage in social media, and when I see so many, not just devotees, but even non-devotees making comments. I mean, if you go to our Vedic Inquirer, we see all the devotees giving comments that, yeah, I used to be a member of this, and I have so much respect. I don't care anymore. I've lost faith in our movement's ability to protect our children because of, repeated one after another. So it's not just the communications can only do so much, right? We can reflect, we can be the conscience, we can be the voice, but the leadership has to really put it together. Leadership has to do the right thing, and we have to be shouting at the top of lungs, do the right thing. It is hurting us tremendously, and we may never be able to measure the damage, because those who decided, when they read these articles or when they somehow find out, appalling history, and decided this is not for me, and make sure our children don't go anywhere near that organization, how can you measure how many people we lost? There's no way. You can only estimate based on those who have left, and those who are coming and making some comments that, hey, I'll never come. And that's just a small sampling, a tip of the iceberg. So there's no question that it's hurting us massively. Just because we're having growth doesn't mean that it's not hurting us. That growth could have been 10 times more, perhaps, or double, or whatever, and we could have taken over the world by now had it not been for this. You never know. But there's no question that it hurts us.
And as you've indicated, the internal reputation, what to speak of the general public perception, is a big deal. I worry that sometimes people will see a site like Vedic Inquirer, and I'm thinking, when I say people here, leaders, and they'll just go, oh, these are just some disengaged deplorables, they don't have anything positive to say. And they sort of dismiss the legitimacy. I'm curious, because you are a communications person, for want of active leadership engagement and good grievance channels, what do you see as the legitimacy of a site like Vedic Inquirer, where conversations are out in the open about this? Is it necessary? Is it problematic? What's your view?
It's a good platform to have in general. And then now the problem with any platform is that, okay, you may also get some voices who, you know, it's a legitimate complaint that they're making, but if they're doing it in a really intense and egregious or even unfair way, it may make them look bad. No, this is just, you know, like it's extreme. So in my opinion, I don't think Vedic Inquirer is extreme. I think it's very, you know, most of the articles and things are very well balanced. I don't think it's a problem. But because it's focused on one thing, and people may think this is a newspaper that you get a buffet of other things. No, we're only focusing on this. And so it may seem like a bit much. It's all you guys are talking about. Well, that's what the whole title is. So that's okay. If you can't handle it, that's fine. Read whatever you like. I think it has a place for it. Now, and to talk about this whole, the spectrum of what is considered extreme and what is considered normal. And the spectrum can be applied to, say, how you adjudicate these cases, or how we overall put together policies for say child protection related things. So on one hand is, okay, we have zero tolerance for sure, but then what is the legal criteria, or what is the criteria that we use to consider a person to be, you know, responsible or guilty or something? We have a standard, we have a CPO standard of preponderance of evidence, and all those things are being discussed in the Vedic Inquirer, you know, and they do come up. I think it's good because it educates people on what's being done and all that. And then there's the other extreme, that there is too much accusatory, like we're very easy to accuse, you know, and then even innocent people who really may not have done anything get such a bad name that they end up you know, losing their name, their good name, and they may have actually been innocent, because we tend to err on the side of, you know, protecting the children, right? It's still an error. So I think part of the balance needs to be that balance in the sense that people should be able to see the policies and the due process in particular that we have as an organization is very, very fair and very clear. And if we can communicate that on a platform like the Inquirer, which I like because it's a popular platform. There's many, many people who read it, and it's easy to access. It's not too technical. You know, it's not like you're going through legalistic words to figure out what a policy is. So if that platform could be used to show that there is either too much due process or not enough due process, and people can openly discuss those kind of things and express their angles in a public forum like this, and the public can comment on it, I think it's an opportunity for us to be better. I think the Vedic Inquirer is an opportunity to talk about these things, and perhaps even bring, like we're coming together here, bring other devotees who are into this, or maybe lawyer devotees who know these kind of processes, just so to educate the public, to tell them that, look, it's not too much this way or too much that way. It's due process. And we're trying to be as fair as possible to everybody while doing the best to protect our children. So this is why I see the platform of Vedic Inquirer growing and gaining even more of a following when we engage in this sort of discussion.
There's certainly an open invitation to all of those types of contributors that you've described. You've talked about GBC training and so on. I was in some ways at the vanguard of professional training in the society. Back in the day, we're talking early 90s, Sridhar Swami and Naveen Krishna Prabhu and a couple of us went and got some training in Stephen Covey's work. And in particular, the importance of a leader in listening. So you've described how sometimes, you know, in the Vedic Inquirer, we might actually have a lot of traumatized individuals who naturally do have some hot feelings that they're expressing about, you know, what's happened to them. They still have open wounds, and they're shocked at some of the things that are taking place. To me, this is where leaders really prove their mettle. I facilitate workshops all the time, and if I choose to shut down someone just because I don't like the, you know, the nature of their communication, that's my disqualification as a facilitator of those sessions. So I think there's something about leaders. There's a term an old friend of mine used to have, sitting in the fire. So it's, of course, it's deeply uncomfortable. And you may feel, oh, this is hostile or this is unfair. But avoiding those conversations, I think, actually compounds the issue. That's why I was really grateful that you actually stepped forward here. What do you think it's going to take for ISKCON leaders to be willing to engage with the masses from a communications perspective and hear grievances? There's not just grievances about, you know, child protection violations. There's grievances about the legitimacy of succession and, you know, many other factors. And there's this reputation, perhaps, that ISKCON leaders are in their ivory towers. They turn up when their feet are being washed and the flower petals, but they're not ready to do the sitting in the fire and that hard work of listening to the pain of people who've become disenfranchised and disengaged, and I guess demonstrating their commitment to seeing the movement come good. Just interested in your thoughts on all of that. Again, as a comms person, the need for ISKCON leaders to listen, to be seen to be listening, and not to close themselves off because the conversation gets a bit intense.
Yeah. That's certainly, there's certainly something that we could do to improve that perception, for sure. There is, and like you mentioned, the image of the GBCs in their ivory towers, just kind of closed off, and the only time you see them is once in a while, and they realize, oh, we have a GBC, you know. So that is, now, of course, what is causing that can be debated, but and some GBCs are actually, I would say most GBCs are stretched thin. I'm beginning to know them personally more as I get more involved in leadership. They're very, very stretched thin, and they can, and because of that, you know, you have to cover so much by one person, and there's so many, movement is growing really fast. There's so many people now under each GBC. Sometimes we have one GBC who's in charge of millions and millions of population-wise coverage, right? So they are stretched thin. That's one issue, and so they can barely keep up. And so there's that. There's the risk of burnout, and then there's also aging. You know, just this year we had a handful, quite a bunch of GBCs announced their retirements. And so many announced at the same time, it almost looked like, hey, what's going on? Are there people jumping ship, or what's actually happening? But because our GBCs are aging very rapidly at the same time, around the same time, because they joined at the same time. So there's that crisis. And so that's, so whoever's remaining, I stretch even more thin. So to kind of combat that, last few years, the GBC has been very actively working to implement the second layer, the zonal supervisor layer, who is the representative of the GBC. And the zonal supervisor can then be more active on the ground to hear the grievances. Not necessarily so much as an ombudsperson to try, but just to hear and then convey. And then at least the GBC will understand. I'll give you an example. Suppose there's a temple, right? And there are pujaris there, and the pujaris only speak, say, some either Bengali or Oriya or something like that. And the GBC is from Australia or say Europe or an American. The pujari cannot have a direct line to the GBC if they wanted to escalate something or say have a grievance, because first the language barrier, second, you know, so far they hardly even come, they can't even see in person. So the layer of active local engaged zonal supervisor is essential, where now these devotees who previously had no access to the, now have the bridge, and those things do start coming up. And when those things get escalated, GBC is like, oh my God, I had no idea. It's good you told me. A lot of the time is that, it's not that they don't want to hear it. It's just they're stretched thin and they're isolated. They don't come nearly enough. And the people on the ground cannot always connect with them. So if you have a tissue of connectivity a little bit more, that's pervasive, that's actually practical and working, we are seeing, at least in my experience, I've been zone supervisor like 4 years now, in my 5th year. It actually seems to be working. Where now GBCs are like, oh yeah, wow, this is really happening. It's good you told me. So that is helping. It's a structural way to kind of help that image. And our GBCs are a little more engaged now. Like, in fact, just a few days ago, our GBC came here and we went on Harinam. Like, let's all go on Harinam. So now they see, wow, our GBCs, so you guys not doing enough Harinam. Come on, let's do it. You know, and he just came to said, let's get a Madanga, let's go. And we got a dozen devotees and everyone was so happy. And now they could sit down. We sat down, we ate watermelon, and they asked him questions and he spoke to them about whatever. You know, this sort of thing, if more GBCs do, if more devotees and leaders start doing, I think it'll help. But we've had a lot of stagnancy, a lot of inaccessibility, and we've recognized that. The GBC recognizes it, but to solve this sort of thing, it does take a little bit of shift in the structure of the organization, in the cultural understanding, and then we want to increase the accessibility, you know, put some more oil in the machine and add some more cogs, if you will. So we are trying, sincerely trying, and we do want to, this is not just like a PR kind of stunt that we want to now to kind of cover over the GBCs we're hiding. No, we really want to create venues and conduits for communication. You know, sometimes it's an unfair characterization that every leader in ISKCON is just, you know, corrupt and they're not really trying very hard. All they care is their footpath. And that's also somewhat unfair, I would say. There may be some truth to it, and a lot of it is perception. Perception becomes reality. The leaders I know are trying to be, you know, sincere in many ways. There's some burnout, and then there's some blocking, closing off. I'm not saying it's right, but I understand, you know.
And there's certainly no disputing that many of them are super busy. And this is where prioritization comes in. You referred earlier to the need to divert more funds to child protection. And, you know, what a person finds time for is somewhat indicative of their priorities. I think it was Eleanor Roosevelt who said something like, you can tell more about a person's values by looking at their calendar entries and their checkbook stubs than what they might profess. Something that Kripa Moiprabhu and I used to sometimes talk about back in the 90s, there was a campaign for pets. What happened after Christmas, a lot of pets were then put into the pet shelter. Someone had gone through the short-term pleasure of buying a puppy for a child for Christmas. And when it actually came to the long haul of maintaining the, you know, the puppy, they really weren't up for it. It was just a gimmick. So we actually thought of creating a T-shirt, "A disciple is for life, not just for Christmas." You know, something like that. Now, here's where I'm going with this. So making babies is fun. Raising a child all the way through to adulthood, especially through the difficult teenage years, that's where one's parenting, you know, commitments are really tested, and one's skills and so on are tested. And I wonder if there's something similar. You know, it's very easy to get excited about new devotees who are coming, you know, full of that initial taste of Krishna consciousness and blissful and subservient and hanging on one's every word. And then a few years later, the person might be a little bit more gnarly, a little bit more, you know, maybe now they're having difficulties. Maybe now they have a crisis of faith. Maybe now they have an attitude and maybe aren't quite as cute as they might have been in their early years. And there's a worry, I guess, that, you know, so much energy goes on the shiny new person, and perhaps we cut people loose when they're, and this is especially true, let's say, of the Gurukulis, you know, that they feel like, oh, you didn't quite turn out how we feel really good about. So, you know, have a nice life, but we're going to focus on these other people over here. They're shiny and submissive and so on. Do you have any thoughts on that sort of observation?
Yeah, that's it's a pattern, and statistically, it's very, very much seen. You know, it's not one or two examples, it's almost ubiquitous. And especially Gurukulis or the children, those who were children in ISKCON through the 70s and 80s, are most of them well-adjusted, socially contributing members. Forget about them being devotees. Are they even just, living in stable situations? We don't know. And many of them have been, unfortunately, gone through incredible trauma because of our failures in child protection. And so this idea, and of course the pattern, there's the children part of it, but there's also the other pattern of overall care, right? New devotees is, like you said, they have the bliss going on for them, and then they have this stars in the eyes for all the leaders. Oh, you guys are so wonderful, and they just will do anything for you. They work 25 hours a day for you, and they feel the bliss. But then what about those who joined 15 years ago? Why are they not feeling the bliss? And then if you were to poll them or talk to them, a lot of the shine has gone. Well, they should be actually shinier at this point. They should be smiling even more, because the bliss is only supposed to increase. Anandam buddhi vardhanam should be increasing, right? What happened? So a lot of it is what we call devotee care. Are we giving them the care that we were giving them when they were new? Are we taking them for granted? This whole idea of using the people to build the projects rather than using the projects to build people. That applies to new devotees. It applies to our children also to some extent. So if we have to measure ourselves by how much we build our people, and if a project fails, but the people have become much stronger and resilient and much more loving devotees, then it's not a failure. But if we lose our people and a project, managed to put together a building or whatever, but we've lost so many because of the way we treated them, then even the building is a failure. Everything is a failure. Prabhupada would say, he'd talk about this a lot. So I think it's this devotee care, there's a wave of trying to raise awareness of devotee care with people or projects that is happening now. The devotees travel around giving seminars, waking up the leaders and showing this is not what we do. So that's also a natural part of our evolution. It's not happening fast enough, but I'm seeing it happening. And this applies to children as well. Let's care for our people first. We get carried away by metrics, the numbers of how many books went out and how many buildings were built, how many new temples were opened, and how many new people joined. But how you quantify the qualities of the quiet quitting, as you call it, where devotees come, they're still coming to the temple, but they're doing the bare minimum, and they're not quite smiling as much as they used to. They still want to be connected because they love Krishna, but because of the way they've been treated, the way they're evaluated, the way I'm not saying there's no problematic people. Sometimes once in a while you do get problematic people, but in general, the responsibility falls upon the shoulder of leaders at all levels, our higher level leaders, our local leaders, and even our bhakta leaders or volunteer coordinators. Everybody, has some responsibility when you take some leadership position. So it's a cultural shift, I agree, that is sorely lacking historically, and we are not doing it fast enough, but things are happening. This at least the ideas are being propagated now. So I'm seeing some hope. And some of our temples, by the way, that I'm working with, the leaders know this very well. And you know what? The devotees under their care, I kid you not, they're really happy. I went to visit one temple that's under my jurisdiction, and the temple president spent a good 4 or 5 hours with him. And then I spent several hours talking to all the devotees that live in the temple. And I'm like, hey, you guys have your green cards, right? Yeah, we had a green card for like 15 years. You didn't leave the temple? Typically, the idea is like you come from outside, you just come to the temple for a green card, and then as soon as you get it, you get out. Like, no, this is the best place in the world. Our president is so wonderful. We have no need for anything. We get to serve the Lord, and our children are going to the school, and they're becoming devotees. What more do you want? I'm telling you, there are good leaders out there. Not enough, though. Not nearly enough. So we do need to learn from them. And the secret ingredient that I see of success is these leaders care. They talk one-to-one. they prioritize the devotees first. And if they have to delay the project of other things, they delay it. But, invest in the people. You can't go wrong. Invest your energy, invest your finances, invest your resources. It's always a good return on that.
So we're coming up to the hour mark. I wanted to thank you once again for being so courageous as to come forward. Thank you for your commitment to child protection, you and your family. Thank you for what you're doing around, the reform of leadership and those kind of things. You have spoken about the need for, more funding, for better education, and a number of other initiatives. If you had some closing comments for anyone viewing this around, why you have hope that we're winning the war ultimately in terms of the health of the movement and eradicating abuse, what's giving you that sense of hope, and what hope would you instill in others?
Yes, I have a great deal of hope because there are devotees who have woken up and continue to wake up to the importance of protecting our children. At the same time, I do feel there's not nearly enough vigilance. So I encourage devotees to be more educated and learn about vigilance, because vigilance is the price that we pay for our peace. So be vigilant, be educated in child protection, perhaps touch base with your local, if you're part of a community in ISKCON or temple, touch base with your leaders and see what all things are going on in the area of child protection. And if they have a child protection team there, if they have a team lead, get in touch with them. You may or may not have children yourself, but it doesn't matter. Everybody in the movement is the children of, Prabhupada. And so we owe it to our children. Please learn about it. See where you can help your local child protection team. Maybe you could even sign up for some of their volunteer, sometimes we volunteer for doing the rounds, making sure everything is safe during the Sunday feast. And you can sign up for that. So many different ways you can help and spread the word. And also, try to talk to leaders to see if they would like to, every once in a while, take the courageous step and speak about the importance. Just come out and say, I stand for what is right. People need to know. And our local leaders can also then hold accountable the higher leaders and say, by the way, Maharaj or Prabhu or Mataji, when you come to our temple for your next GBC visit, would you talk a few minutes about child protection, the importance of it? It's a nice thing to talk about as a leader. This way, what happens is that you get our leaders to also open up and share their support, or at least express it. And then you can ask them, by the way, practically, what can we do to be better? Maybe the grassroots is a good way to also go about it. So I thank you, Damodar Prabhu, for this opportunity. And I look forward to speaking to you some more. And I do appreciate your efforts and decades of service to ISKCON, to Srila Prabhupada's movement. And I am grateful for this time that we had together. Hare Krishna.
Thank you, Prabhu. We'll upload this shortly, and I hope you'll be able to join in with some of the comments. I can't guarantee they'll all be sweet and full of light and sun, but I think that conversation that we're trying to have here, as you've indicated, is so important. Hare Krishna. Thank you very much, Prabhuji. And let's see if we can encourage other leaders to do like you and go on the record and talk about the importance of child protection. Okay, I'm going to stop the recording.